going on, guys? Welcome back. We are continuing where we left off last time with the Wu-Tang collection. We are going into the RZA's solo work. He debuted as a solo artist under the name Bobby Digital. Bobby Digital was kind of a way for the RZA to just cut loose and just wild out and do a bunch of crazy shit. The production is nothing like your standard Wu-Tang production. It's very technical, like computer sci-fi bugged out. It's really, really weird. I think it works really well on this first album, and I think this is probably as good as Bobby Digital music gets. This also, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this also has a guest appearance from War Cloud on here. That was just incredible. Yeah, I think it's the Holocaust song. That song's incredible, amazing verse. This is a really solid album. It's very different from what you would expect from a Wu-Tang release. He followed it up with Digital Bullet, which I was a fan of this album originally, but every time I revisit it, it seems to get a little worse. I'd have to listen to it again. I don't remember it being outright terrible, though. I'm sure there's a lot of really dope songs on that. This was an interesting, almost a concept from the RZA, The World According to RZA. It's basically an album he put together with a bunch of international artists that most of us have probably never heard of. If you're a really hardcore Wu-Tang head like myself, it's interesting. For your average hip-hop fan, you're probably not going to need this one. But it is interesting to hear other rappers from other cultures and other language and how they interpret hip-hop. This was the RZA's first solo album under his own name. And this is interesting because it's kind of a split between the Bobby Digital persona and the RZA persona. He's got a lot of, not strictly club music, but it is more mainstream club music. But then when you get to the end of the album, you see A Day to God is 1,000 Years, Cherry Range, The Birth, See the Joy. Those rank amongst the best Wu-Tang music that's ever been made. I would die on that hill. I think there are select cuts from this album that are as good as anything that any of the other Wu members have ever put out. I just think this album as a whole is very inconsistent, and it does not thematically have a feel to hold it together in the way that you would really hope for. But there are some absolutely must check out tracks on that one. The last Bobby Digital album he released, I was a huge fan of this when it came out, and then when I went back to it a few years ago, it was absolutely awful. I did not enjoy anything about it. Critically, it was not heralded very well. The fan reaction was not that great, so I'm not sure what it was. Maybe I was just hungry for some more RZA music. But yeah, you could definitely skip that one. RZA was kind of in a slump for a while there. He was not being overly well received by the critics or the fans. And that all changed when the Afro Samurai show / movie / OVA, whatever you want to call it, when they released that and he was tapped to do the soundtrack. This really revitalized and put him in a better light than what he had been at. This soundtrack has one of my favorite songs with Big Daddy Kane and GZA going back to back. That's an incredible song. If you're a fan of hip hop, that one is that's absolutely a must listen to track. This is a solid album. I'm not gonna overhype it and say it's incredible, it's amazing, but this is solid. I think the follow-up might have been a little bit better. He's got Cool G Raps on here, which immediately just makes it great. Ghostface is on here. Inspect the Deck. This is a really solid. It's a lot more. The first soundtrack is kind of a split between original hip hop tracks and then the actual score from the show. This one is more so just a straight up hip hop soundtrack. Just a lot of dope rappers spitting. This was from the RZA's movie, his directorial debut. I did not like the movie. I actually hated it, but I love this soundtrack. This is one of my all-time favorite soundtracks. It's got an incredible lineup. The Black Keys, Ghostface, M.O.P., and Pharoah Monch. Kanye West is on there. Talib Kweli. Wu-Tang with G-Rap, Killa Sin, Pusha T, Raekwon, Joel Ortiz, Danny Brown. This is as good, as any movie soundtrack out there. I think a lot of people slept on this one. Again, the movie was not great, but the soundtrack is so criminally underrated. That's the instrumentals. That's pretty self-explanatory. This one, let me see. I think this might have been, okay, the original motion picture score. This is like the actual music from the movie. Again, I did not enjoy the movie. As you can probably tell, I haven't even bothered to open that CD up. And then this one, I think this is just like a mixtape. Some classic soul music. Gravediggaz, legendary group consisting of the RZA, Prince Paul, Fruquan, and Poetic. This album is one of the greatest hip-hop albums you will probably ever hear. A lot of people say that it birthed the genre of horrorcore. I don't know if I would go that far, but it's definitely one of the staples of that genre. And just everything about this album. First of all, Prince Paul's production on this might be his best production. And that's saying a lot for, the man that produced some of the best De La Soul records ever. But like the production on this is flawless. The chemistry between the MCs is flawless. That is a perfect album. The follow-up, not as good, but still slept on. This one sounds more like a Wu-Tang album, whereas the first Gravediggaz sounded like its own thing. This one definitely sounds like a Wu-Tang record. Prince Paul has much less to do with this. I can't even remember if he had any production on here. He might have done a skit or two. I don't know that he produced any songs, but if you're a Wu-Tang fan, that one is definitely one you will get some enjoyment out of. Eventually, Poetic and Fruquan carried on without RZA, without Paul. They started doing their own thing. If you enjoy those two as rappers, which I do, rest in peace to Poetic. I think this is another solid album. Obviously, it pales in comparison to the first few, but if you want more Gravediggaz, there's more Gravediggaz. Takao, Method Man. A lot of people will rank this as one of the weaker of the classic Wu debuts. I personally think this is flawless. I think this is as good as a hip-hop album can be. Fantastic production. It matches Meth perfectly. His songwriting is on point. His rapping, his flows. The only fault I've ever had with this album is I think it's mixed sloppy. I really don't like the mix on it. But I think this is as good as Only Built, as good as Liquid Swords. I think any Wu-Tang album you could put this up against, I think it ranks up there, for me at least. This one the music here is good, but it's 28 tracks. It's a really bloated album. A lot of that is skits. If you'd have cut all the filler out of this, there's a decent, solid album in there. With all the skits and stuff, though, man, it really drags it down. That being said, we live in an era of digital music. Skits aren't shit. You can skip them. Definitely some songs on that you need to check out. I sat down with this one not long ago, and I just couldn't find anything I liked about it. And this is widely considered to be Method Man's worst album, and it's for good reason. Like, he really went for the mainstream on this one, and it's glaringly obvious he went for a mainstream CD with this, and it just doesn't work to me. It sounds very cheap, it sounds very forced, and it is not at all what I wanted from Method Man. This CD has kind of seen a resurgence amongst fans lately. When it came out, I listened to it, I thought it was okay. It was a step in the right direction, but I didn't think it was amazing. I've been seeing people say that this is their favorite Method Man album. I don't understand it, but I mean, more power to you if you enjoy it that much. There is a lot of solid cuts here, but I don't think there's anything that really stands out for me. But it is a solid album. Street Life, which was kind of like Method Man's Trife to God. Every Wu member's got their homie that they got to put on. Street Life has been around for a while. He pops up on a lot of Method Man shit. This is a cool album. I'm not a huge Street Life fan, but there's nothing wrong with him either. He's a decent rapper. How High soundtrack. I don't think that really needs a lot of explaining. And then I would consider that to be a classic. Some of Method Man and Redman's best rhyming on there. You can tell that they really pushed each other to up their pen game. So I think technically, like strictly speaking on a technical level, this is absolutely some of their best rapping. Insane flows, insane wordplay. The production is a little bit poppy, but it works for what it's intended for. And I think you could definitely consider that a classic. The follow-up I was very disappointed by. I did not think it was that great of an LP. It just didn't connect with me. I thought the production was way too glossy, way too mainstream, way too unremarkable. That's how I would describe this album. Anything involving Redman and Method Man should not be unremarkable, and this album is unremarkable for me. Cappadonna. A lot of hip-hop fans kind of consider Cappadonna to be the butt of any Wu-Tang joke you could possibly tell. This album is actually really good. This is a classic Wu-Tang album. Really good, grimy 90s Wu-Tang sounding production. Cappadonna does his thing on this. He's not top tier where, you know, the Genius is at. He's not as charismatic as Ghost. But this album just works. Everything about this works. I've always thought it was interesting. He has a track on here, number 3, which is Run, which Ghostface would later rework into his run with Jadakiss off the Pretty Tony album. A lot of people sleep on the fact that that was originally a Cappadonna joint. The reason Cappadonna is so frowned upon is because he put out a bunch of albums like this, where they were just very weak, very forgettable. Like this one, this was not a great album. It's got came with that. He did start to turn it around. Some of his later releases, this being one of them, have gotten better. I wouldn't go out of my way to check for a Cappadonna album, but when one of them falls into my lap now, I at least feel more confident in listening to him than what I did before. He's definitely trying a little more, I would say. Killah Priest, Heavy Mental. This is another incredible album. Very interesting because you hear Priest rap a lot about like Christianity, whereas the Wu-Tang kind of went the opposite way on that. The religious aspects of this album has always fascinated me. Great production, a lot of classic songs. It starts off really strong. One Step, that's an incredible song. Blessed Are Those, that's an incredible song. He's got Bible on there, which was also on Liquid Swords. That's a classic album. It's a little long, 20 tracks, but I mean, they were all long back then. Views from Masada. Priest's later albums did not live up to Heavy Mental for me, but I still think that they're all solid albums. I think if you liked Heavy Mental, you'll find some enjoyment out of these. It's just the production. The production is kind of what kills these later Killah Priest albums from me. You can see he's got the Four Horsemen on there, which they just finally released their album after God knows how long. This one I actually really enjoyed. Out of all those, I don't want to say mid-tier, but all those albums after Heavy Mental, this was probably my favorite. I thought that was really good. And then he put out one of his gems, which was The Offering. You could tell he was very focused on this project. There's a lot of thought that went into it. The production matches the lyricism. This is a really strong album. It's a really good comeback album. And then he released that, which some people like, but I personally found it to be one of the most boring albums I had ever heard in my life. I used to put this album on to go to sleep. Like when I would have trouble sleeping, I would put this on. This CD would put me to sleep every time. It's just so... The production is so mundane and uninspired, and Priest is just rapping very lazy. Not lyrically, but like his actual delivery, for me, is just very lackluster. And the same could be said about this. I was really excited about this. The idea of Killah Priest and Chief Kamachi linking up. I thought that was genius. I thought they're as good as any duo of rappers you could put together. But this was another one where this album just bored me to tears. Bored me to tears. Sons of Man, which was a project Killah Priest was a part of originally. 60 Second Assassin, Prodigal Son, Hellraiser. There's other members. That's kind of like your main core. This was the only album that Priest himself was really heavily involved in, and it is their best album. This is definitely a Wu classic as far as like, the Killarmy releases, the Sons of Man releases, the Law of the Dark Man. This definitely ranks up there with the best. I just recently really started digging in to the later Sons of Man releases. I kind of fell off of them after that first album. I picked this one up recently. I really enjoyed it. I'm very excited to start taking a deep dive into the rest of their catalog. The Almighty, which right there on the cover, Killah Priest, M80, Bronze Nazareth, C. Ray's Walls is on there. This was kind of like an underground supergroup. This was an okay album. It's definitely got some gems on it. The production does not live up to the level of lyricism that an artist like Killah Priest or C. Ray's Walls can bring. When you got Bronze Nazareth on there, like if you have Bronze Nazareth, you almost want him producing the whole thing. Like he's such a great producer. But that's a solid album. They put out a second one too. I think Cannabis was featured heavily on the second one. Black Market Militia, Tragedy Gaddafi, Hellraiser, Timbo King, William Cooper, Killah Priest. This is a really solid album. The production is not as elevated as the lyricism is, but you cannot go wrong with a super group like that. Just having Hellraiser and Killah Priest and Timbo King, just them alone, and then you throw in a Juice Crew legend with Tragedy. William Cooper's dope. I got one of his albums tucked in here. Killarmy, which I can't pick a favorite from their albums. A lot of people would say Dirty Weaponry. I think I can't say all three of their albums because they just recently put out another album. But as far as like their original three albums, I really like all of their albums just about equally. I enjoy everything they did. This is just like as raw as Wu-Tang music got. This was just dirty, filthy production. MCs just rapping to rap, and I loved it. I loved everything about those Killarmy releases. And that finishes up that shelf. So next time, pan over here, we are going to be digging into, we got more Wu-Tang, more Wu affiliates, and then we're going to be getting into the Boot Camp Clique, which that's going to be a lot of fun. I got a lot of really dope Boot Camp Clique albums. And then after the Boot Camp Clique, we're going to be getting into Nonfiction, Necro, Ill Bill. So there's a lot of fun stuff waiting for us. Till next time, guys.